What was in the box? That's the question that broke me. I've hauled everything from produce to computer parts, and you learn not to ask. But this load felt different. The rig was heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. I told myself it was just the high pay making me jumpy, that I was imagining the way the men in the black car looked at my trailer. Maybe I was. Maybe I was just a lonely driver whose imagination filled an empty box with ghosts. But the way they sealed it, it wasn't to keep people out. It was to keep something in. 20 years I've been hauling loads across this country. 20 years of sunrises over the Rockies and sunsets sinking into the Pacific. You see a lot. You learn the rhythms of the road, the hum of the tires on fresh asphalt, the groan of the air brakes on a steep grade. You learn to trust your gut, because out here, your gut is the only partner you've got. My name's Frank, and my rig, a cherry red Peterbilt 389 I call the Matador, has been my office, my home, and my sanctuary for most of my adult life. I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. This whole mess started with a run that was, on paper, a trucker's dream. A new client, some high-tech logistics firm out of Portland called Ethelred Solutions. Never heard of them, but the money they were offering was almost triple the going rate for a straight shot from Oregon to a secure facility in Denver. The cargo was listed as sensitive geological survey equipment. One 20-foot sealed container, locked at their facility, to be unlocked only by the receiver. Easy. A milk run. The only strange part was the rules. A thick packet of them. No unscheduled stops. Maintain a specific speed range. Stick to the designated route. I-84 east, then cut down through Idaho and Wyoming. No CB radio chatter about the load. And the weirdest one, if for any reason I was delayed by more than 30 minutes, I had to call a special number and report it. It felt less like a hauling contract and more like I was transporting a vital organ. Still, for the money they were paying, they could ask me to sing opera at every way station. I just want to get the job done and see that fat paycheck clear. I picked up the container just after dusk from a sterile, windowless warehouse in an industrial park that looked more like a government black site than a shipping depot. They loaded it with a crane, bolted it to my flatbed themselves, and had me sign a mountain of NDAs. The foreman, a guy with a military haircut and eyes that didn't blink, just handed me the packet and said, "Stay on schedule, driver." That's all that matters. The first few hours were smooth. The Matador was running like a dream, the engine a low, comforting rumble beneath my feet. I was making good time, cruising through the Columbia River Gorge as the last light bled from the sky, leaving the towering cliffs as dark silhouettes against a sea of stars. It's a beautiful stretch of road, but at night, it's just you, the white lines, and a whole lot of empty, black space. That's when I first saw it. A car. A black Lincoln Town car. Maybe 10 years old, the kind that used to be a cop car or a government fleet vehicle. It was just there, about 100 yards back, sitting in my right side mirror, its headlights two perfect, unwavering circles. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People pace trucks all the time. But after an hour, it was still there. Not gaining, not falling back. When I sped up to 65, it sped up. When I eased back to 60, it eased back. It was locked onto me. A little prickle of annoyance started crawling up my neck. I've dealt with road rage, drunks, and sleepy drivers drifting over the line. This felt different. It felt professional, calculated. Another hour passed. The gorge had opened up into the rolling hills of eastern Oregon. It was just me and the Lincoln under a cold, bright moon. The coffee I'd chugged back in Portland was starting to work its way through me, and my eyelids were getting heavy. The contract said no unscheduled stops, but the sign for the Boardman rest area were coming up. It was a big, well-lit stop, always a few other rigs parked for the night. A quick 5-minute break to stretch my legs, splash some water on my face, and drain the lizard wasn't an unscheduled stop. It was just common sense. A safety brake. I signaled, geared down, and felt the satisfying hiss of the air brakes as I pulled into the truck parking area. I parked under a bright sodium lamp, killed the engine, and did a quick scan of the mirrors. The Lincoln didn't follow me in. It just kept going, disappearing down the interstate. A wave of relief washed over me. See? Just some random traveler heading the same way. My road-weary brain was playing tricks on me. I chuckled at myself, grabbed my keys, and hopped down from the cab. The cold desert air felt good. 5 minutes, that's all I took. When I came back out, the Matador was sitting right where I left her, humming softly as the engine block cooled. I did a quick walk around, a habit you never break. Tires good, line secure, container untouched. Everything was exactly as it should be. I climbed back into the cab, fired her up, and merged back onto the empty highway, feeling refreshed and a little foolish. I was maybe 10 miles down the road, the rest area a faint glow in my mirrors, when a pair of headlights flared to life on a dark, unlit access road up ahead. A vehicle pulled out, smoothly, deliberately, and settled in behind me. It was the black Lincoln, and this time, my blood ran cold, because I could see something I couldn't see before. In a crisp night air, clear as day, the passenger side window was down. It felt like they hadn't just been following me. It felt like they'd been waiting for me to make a mistake. Scene 2/12. The sight of that Lincoln pulling out of the darkness turned the cab of the Matador into an icebox. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a predator. My hands tightened on the wheel, the worn leather cool against my sweating palms. Every instinct, honed over 2 decades of lonely nights on the interstate, was screaming. This was wrong. This was calculated. The highway stretched out ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through an ocean of sagebrush and shadow, and I felt utterly, completely exposed. My first thought was to get on the CB. Channel 19. A quick call for a Smokey report. See if any state patrol was in the area. But the foreman's words echoed in my head. No CB radio chatter about the load. And the contract. That damn contract. Was this a test? Some kind of bizarre security audit from Ethelred Solutions? It was the only thing that made a lick of sense. They hire a random driver for a high-value load, pay him an obscene amount of money, and then put a ghost car on his tail to make sure he sticks to the rules. My stop at Boardman was a violation, plain and simple. I broke the protocol. Now, they were letting me know they were watching. The Lincoln didn't stay behind me for long. It accelerated smoothly, its engine a low, unheard thrum. It slid into the lane beside me, matching my speed perfectly. The passenger window was still down. I risked a glance. The interior of the car was a black hole. The dome light was off, and the dashboard lights were dimmed to nothing. I couldn't make out a face, not even a silhouette. It was just a void, a patch of deeper darkness moving at 60 miles an hour. It paced me for what felt like an eternity, maybe 30 seconds in reality. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing my fear. Then, as silently as it appeared, it dropped back again, settling into its familiar position 100 yards behind me. A message had been delivered. We see you. We are right here. The fear began to subside, replaced by a grudging kind of understanding. This was the false explanation I sold myself, the one that let me keep my hands from shaking. They were security. My own private, creepy, over-the-top security detail. The high pay, the weird rules, it all clicked into place. They weren't hijackers. Hijackers hit you fast. They don't play these kinds of psychological games. These guys were professionals, just like me. They had a job to do, watch the asset. And I, the driver, was just another component of that asset. My brief, unauthorized stop was a deviation. Their little stunt was a warning shot, a way of reminding me who was in charge without ever saying a word. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of stale coffee and anxiety. Okay, I can work with this. I'm a professional. They want a pro. I'll give them one. No more stops. No more deviations. I'll keep the needle pinned at the perfect speed, stay in my lane, and become the most boring, predictable driver on I-84. Let them watch. I'll give them nothing to see. The rest of a journey to Denver would be a masterclass in trucking perfection. The thought gave me a sliver of control back. I wasn't the victim here. I was a contractor who'd been reminded of the terms of his employment. The miles rolled by. The Lincoln remained a steady presence in my mirrors. The moon climbed higher. I settled into the rhythm, focusing on the hum of the Cummins engine, the feel of the road. I was in the zone now, back in my element. My little theory had calmed the storm in my gut. I glanced down at my instrument panel, running a routine check of the gauges. Oil pressure good, engine temp stable, fuel plenty. Everything was exactly where it should be. And then I saw it. Tucked away under the lip of the dashboard, just to the right of the steering column, was a tiny red light. It was no bigger than a pinhead, and it was blinking. A steady, silent pulse. Blink, blink, blink. It wasn't part of the Peterbilt's standard panel. It was alien. It was new. My blood went arctic. I'd spent thousands of hours in this cab. I knew every screw, every scratch, every rattle. That light had not been there when I left Portland. I leaned down, my eyes tracing the fine wire leading from it to a small, black plastic square, no bigger than a matchbox, adhered to the underside of the dash. It was perfectly placed to be almost invisible unless you were looking for it. And it was blinking. It had only started blinking after I got back in the truck at the rest stop. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just following me to make sure I didn't stop. They knew I had stopped. They knew because they'd had all the time in the world to put a bug in my cab while I was inside stretching my legs. The unlocked door, the 5 minutes I was gone, it was an eternity. The black car wasn't a warning. It was a diversion. While my eyes were locked on them, someone else had been inside my sanctuary, inside my home, and I had no idea what that little blinking light meant. Scene 312. That blinking red eye under my dashboard changed everything. My security theory evaporated into the cold night air, leaving a raw, exposed nerve of pure dread. Security doesn't plant bugs. They follow, they observe, they might even report you. They don't break into your cab. That was a violation of a different kind. It was intimate. It was an invasion. My sanctuary, the one place in the world I felt truly in command, was compromised. The Matador no longer felt like my own. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. The stop at Boardman was the key. They needed me out of the truck. They must have had someone else there, a second team, waiting in the shadows of the parking lot. While the Lincoln continued down the highway as a decoy, their man moved in. Swift, silent, professional. I felt a surge of nausea thinking about it. Some stranger's hands on my gear shift, on my seat, crawling around my floorboards. What else had they done? What was the purpose of the bug? Was a microphone? A GPS tracker? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. I had to get off the road. I had to stop and tear that thing out, inspect every inch of my cab. But the contract, the blinking light, the ghost car behind me, they had me pinned. Any deviation now would be an admission that I'd found their device. It would trigger whatever they had planned next. I was caught in a trap of my own making, forced to keep driving east into the desolate heart of Oregon, deeper into their territory. The miles became a blur of hypnotic white lines and the relentless pulse of that red light. Blink, blink, blink. A tiny digital heartbeat counting down to God knows what. I tried the CB, my hand trembling as I reached for the mic. I keyed it, keeping my voice low, trying to sound casual. How about a westbounder? You got a smoky report for me. Static. Just a wall of hissing static. I tried again. Breaker 19. Anyone got their ears on? Nothing. I twisted the channel knob, scanning through the bands. It was dead. Not just quiet, but completely dead. A heavy, unnatural silence where there should have been the crackle and chatter of the road. They had to have installed a jammer. A small, localized field cutting me off from the outside world. Panic was a physical thing now, a coppery taste in the back of my throat. My only link to the world, my lifeline, was gone. I was alone. Truly alone. The landscape was changing, becoming harsher. We were climbing into the Blue Mountains, the road twisting through dense stands of pine that crowded right up to the shoulder. The moon disappeared behind the thick canopy, plunging the highway into an oppressive darkness. It was just my headlights, carving a tunnel through the black. The Lincoln was still back there, its lights sometimes vanishing on the curves, only to reappear a persistent, malevolent ghost. Up ahead, a sign flashed in my high beams. Chain up area 1 mile. It was an opportunity. A wide, paved pull-off designed for dozens of trucks. There would be light. There might be other drivers. I didn't care about the contract anymore. Survival had taken over. I was going to stop, get out, and face whatever was coming. At least I'd do it on my feet. I eased off the throttle, flicked on my signal, and began to gear down for the turnoff. The hiss of the Jake brake echoed through the silent forest. And then it happened. As my speed dropped below 40, the truck lurched violently. A horrific grinding noise erupted from underneath me, a sound of metal screaming in protest. The engine didn't die. It revved uselessly, disconnected from the wheels. The Matador coasted, losing speed fast. I wrestled with the wheel, fighting to keep the now dead weight of the rig and its cargo on the pavement. The chain-up area was just ahead, 100 yards of sanctuary. But my momentum was dying. The truck rolled to a stop 50 feet short of the entrance, half on the shoulder, half in the lane. The trailer angled awkwardly. The engine was still running, but the transmission was shot, completely and utterly gone. I slammed my fist on the dashboard, a wave of helpless fury washing over me. This was no random mechanical failure. 20 years, and my transmission had never so much as hiccuped. This was sabotage. The device they planted wasn't just a bug. It had to be tied into my truck's electronic control module. It was a kill switch. They hadn't just put a bug in my cab, they had neutered my rig. I looked in the mirror. The black Lincoln had stopped 100 yards back. Its headlights cut through the darkness, pinning me in their glare. The engine was off. No one got out. They were just sitting there, watching. The trap had been sprung. I was stranded on a dark mountain pass, my communications cut, my truck disabled, and the predators were just sitting back, waiting. Then, from the passenger side of their car, a single, piercingly bright spotlight clicked on, bathing my cab in a blinding white light. The spotlight was a physical assault. It turned my cab into a stage, erasing the shadows and leaving me naked and exposed. Every speck of dust on the windshield, every scratch on the dash, was thrown into hyper-realistic detail. I shielded my eyes with my hand, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The world outside the beam was a black void. It felt like I was the only person on the planet, pinned under the unblinking eye of a malevolent god. They didn't move. No doors opened. No figures emerged from the Lincoln. They just sat there 100 yards back, holding me in that beam. The message was clear. You are not in control. You will do nothing until we allow it. The silence was immense, broken only by the low rumble of my idling engine and the frantic thumping of my own blood in my ears. The air in the cab grew thick and stale. I was a fish in a bowl. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My initial surge of panic began to curdle into a cold, focused dread. This wasn't a simple hijacking. Hijackers are loud and violent. They swarm you, take your keys, take the truck, and are gone in 60 seconds. This was a siege, a meticulous psychological dismantling. They had isolated me, disabled my rig, and now they were just waiting. For what? For me to break? To run? I forced myself to think, to analyze. My life as a trucker was all about problem solving. Blown tire, engine trouble, blocked route. You assess, you adapt, you overcome. This was just another problem, albeit one with a spotlight and the stench of imminent death. They had disabled the truck electronically. That kill switch, it wasn't a physical break. It was a command sent to the truck's computer. Maybe, just maybe I could reset it. The main circuit breaker panel in a Peterbilt is on the passenger side, down by the floor. It was a long shot, but if I could cut all power to the truck, a hard reboot, it might clear the malicious code from the ECM. It might reset the transmission controls. It was my only play. I had to move, but the spotlight was a cage. Any move I made would be seen. I decided to act normal. Stranded trucker. I reached up, grabbed the mic for the PA system, a separate system from the CB, hardwired directly to the horn speaker. I held down the button. Hey, my rig's broken down here. Need a hand. My voice boomed out into the forest, sounding thin and desperate even with the amplification. No response. The light didn't even flicker. Okay, plan B. I had to get to those breakers. I slid slowly, deliberately, out of my seat, keeping my movements small and non-threatening. I was just a driver checking his fuses. I knelt down on the floor, my back to the blinding light, and fumbled to unscrew the cover of the breaker panel. My fingers were clumsy, stiff with adrenaline. The cover came off. Inside was a neat grid of fuses and circuit breakers. I found the main battery disconnects. 3 big, chunky red switches. I took a deep breath. This would kill everything. The lights, the engine, the blinking red eye on my dash, all of it. Plunging myself into total darkness with those men back, there was a terrifying prospect. But staying here, paralyzed, was a death sentence. I braced myself, my hand hovering over the switches. 3, 2, 1. I slammed them down. The world vanished. The engine died. The dashboard went dark. The hum of electronics ceased. The cab was plunged into an absolute, suffocating blackness. And outside, the world was just as black. The spotlight from the Lincoln had gone out at the exact same instant I hit the breakers. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. My killing the power to my rig had somehow killed the power to their spotlight. The two vehicles were linked. The device they'd planted wasn't just a kill switch and a jammer. It was a receiver, yes, but it was also a transmitter. It was feeding their system's information directly from mine. They knew my speed, my location, my comm status, and my power status. When I went dark, their system, maybe their whole car, was affected. A new, chilling set of rules began to form in my mind. This wasn't just sabotage. This was a hostile takeover of my truck's entire nervous system. They weren't just following me. They were daisy-chained to me. I wasn't hauling a container. I was the container. The silence that followed was deeper, more profound than before. I was blind. They were blind. We were all sitting in the dark on a lonely mountain pass. My play had worked, but it had revealed a truth far more terrifying than a simple kill switch. I didn't know what game we were playing, but I knew the board was my truck itself. I waited, my breath held, for their next move. And then I heard it. A car door opening. A soft click that echoed in the dead still air. Followed by the crunch of footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate, walking towards me through the darkness. The sound of footsteps on gravel was the purest form of terror I have ever known. It wasn't a panicked rush. It was a slow, confident cadence. The crunch of each footfall was a tick of a clock counting down my final seconds. They were coming for me, and I was blind, trapped in a dead metal box. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. My mind, which had been racing, went completely blank for a moment, wiped clean by primal fear. I scrambled back into the driver's seat, my hands fumbling in the dark for something, anything, to use as a weapon. The tire iron. It was behind my seat, a 2-foot length of solid American steel. I got my hand around its familiar, heavy form. The cold metal, a small comfort in the suffocating darkness. I wasn't going to die cowering on the floor. If they were coming in, one of them was coming with me. The footsteps stopped, right outside my driver's side door. I could hear breathing, a slow, calm inhale and exhale, shockingly close. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire. I was braced for the shattering of glass, the wrenching of the door handle. But nothing happened. There was just the sound of that steady, unervingly patient breathing. What were they waiting for? My mind started working again, fear giving way to a frantic, desperate logic. They were outside. They were armed. I had no doubt. They could have smashed the window and been on top of me in a second. But they hadn't. Why? The spotlight. My power cut. They were being cautious. They didn't know what I was doing in the dark. My only advantage was this cab. They didn't know its layout like I did. And they didn't know I had the tire iron. I had to do something. I couldn't just wait for them to make their move. I needed help. The CB was dead. My phone had shown no signal for the last hour, but there was one last resort. Flares. In the side box, under the passenger seat. If I could light a flare, I could turn the tables. I'd have light, and maybe, just maybe, another passing trucker, if there was one, might see it and call it in. The breathing outside stopped. A new sound started. A faint, high-pitched electronic whine. It was coming from the door lock. A metallic click, then a soft whirring sound. They weren't breaking in. They were unlocking my door electronically. The kill switch, the jammer, it was all part of the system. A system that gave them complete control. The lock clicked open. I didn't wait. I lunged across the cab, my shoulder slamming into the passenger door. I shoved it open and tumbled out onto the gravel shoulder, landing hard on my hands and knees. The tire iron clattered on the ground beside me. I ignored it. scrambling towards the passenger side toolbox. My fingers found the latch, flipped it open. I plunged my hand inside, sweeping past greasy rags and spare parts until I felt the familiar cardboard box of the emergency flares. I ripped the box open, pulled one out, and fumbled with the cap. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Behind me, I heard the driver's side door of my cab swing open with a soft groan. They were inside the Matador. I got the cap off the flare, found the striker strip, and scraped it hard. It sputtered, failed. I scraped it again, harder, a prayer on my lips. It caught. A brilliant, hissing, crimson light erupted, painting the entire scene in a demonic red glow. I held it aloft like a torch, my shadow, a towering giant, behind me. And I saw them. There were two of them. They weren't in my cab. They were standing beside the open door, looking at me. They were dressed in plain, dark work clothes, but their faces were covered by smooth, white, expressionless masks. The kind you see in a minimalist play, with no features except for two black holes for eyes. The effect was utterly terrifying, completely inhuman. They didn't react to the flare. They just stood there, their blank faces turned towards me. Then, headlights washed over us from down the road. A truck, an honest-to-God semi, was coming up the pass. Its lights were a beacon of hope, a lifeline from the real world. It was an old Kenworth, pulling a cattle trailer, chugging slowly up the grade. Salvation. I scrambled to my feet, waving the flare frantically over my head. "Hey, stop. Help me. Call the cops." I screamed, my voice raw. The Kenworth slowed, its air brakes hissing. The driver's side window rolled down. An old man with a face like a road map and a sweat-stained trucker cap leaned out. He looked at me, then at the two masked figures standing by my rig. He looked at my disabled truck, angled across the lane. He took in the whole bizarre, terrifying scene. His face was a mask of confusion. "What in the hell is going on here, son?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "They're trying to hijack me." I yelled, pointing with the flare. "Call 911. Get the police." The old trucker stared for a long moment. He looked at the masked men, who hadn't moved a muscle. He looked back at me, a wild man with a flare, screaming on the side of the road. Then his gaze drifted past me, to the 20-foot sealed container on my flatbed. He squinted, his eyes tracing the stenciling on its side. His face changed. The confusion drained away, replaced by something else. A flicker of recognition? No, it was more than that. It was fear, a deep, profound fear. He slowly, deliberately, raised his hands from the steering wheel and placed them on top of his head. He looked straight at me, his eyes wide with terror. "I ain't seen nothing," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm not here. You're on your own." And with that, his window slid up. The Kenworth geared back up and began to pull away, leaving me alone in the red light of the flare with the two silent, masked figures. My one hope had just driven away, more afraid of my cargo than of the men trying to take it. Watching that Kenworth pull away felt like the whole world was shrinking, collapsing down to just this one stretch of godforsaken asphalt. The roar of its engine faded, taking my last sliver of hope with it. I was left in the dying, sputtering crimson light of the flare, the silence rushing back in, heavier and more absolute than before. The old trucker's reaction was more terrifying than if he'd just driven on by. He hadn't just ignored me. He had recognized something. He saw the container, and whatever he saw scared him so badly he wanted no part of it, not even to make a phone call. He acted like a man who had just stumbled upon a mob execution and wanted nothing more than to prove he was blind. My heart sank into my boots. That old driver wasn't an unreliable ally. He was a terrified witness who had just betrayed me with his silence. He was my confirmation that this was something far bigger and more dangerous than I could have imagined. This wasn't just a hijacking. Ethelred Solutions, the sealed container, the men in masks, it was all part of a world with its own rules, and I had broken them. The flare hissed its last and died, plunging us back into darkness. But my eyes had adjusted enough to see the faint outlines of the two masked figures against the slightly less black backdrop of the forest. They still hadn't moved. Their stillness was the most unnerving thing of all. It was the patience of a spider, confident the fly has no hope of escaping the web. I had one card left to play. It was a stupid, desperate suicide mission of a card, but it was all I had. The Matador was dead, but she was pointing downhill on a slight grade. If I could get her rolling, I could coast. It wouldn't be fast, it wouldn't be safe, but it would be movement. It would be a chance. They were still by the driver's side door. The passenger side was my only way in. I backed away slowly, my feet crunching on the gravel, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I needed to get back in the cab, release the parking brake, and pray the slight incline was enough to get this multi-ton beast moving. I took a deep breath and bolted. I didn't run towards the truck, I ran away from it, a wide arc out into the middle of the empty highway, forcing them to choose between me and the rig. I heard the move then, the sound of their boots on the pavement, quick and decisive. I gambled, cutting sharply back towards the passenger side of the cab. I vaulted up the steps, 3 at a time, adrenaline singing in my veins. I threw myself into the passenger seat, scrambling over the center console to get behind the wheel. My hand slammed down on the big yellow knob of the parking brake. I pushed it in. There was a loud, satisfying PSSSHHH as the air released from the lines. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The truck sat motionless. I felt a surge of despair. It wasn't enough. The grade was too shallow. Then, with a deep groan of tortured metal, the Matador began to move. A slow, agonizing creep forward. 1 mile an hour. Then 2. It was working. I was rolling. I grabbed the wheel, my knuckles white, steering the silent, powerless rig down the center of the dark mountain road. A wild, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. I was doing it. I was getting away. I looked in my side mirror. I could see them, 2 dark shapes standing in the road, watching me coast away. They weren't running after me. They weren't getting back in their car. They were just standing there. This should have been a relief, but it was the opposite. It was the calm acceptance of a game's master watching his opponent make a predictable and ultimately futile move. My speed increased. 5 miles an hour. 10. The wind whispered through the open window. It felt like flying. Down the grade I rolled, the twisting road revealing itself only a few dozen feet at a time in the faint starlight. I rounded a sharp curve, the tall pines flashing by like silent sentinels. The 2 figures disappeared from my mirror. I had a lead. The road straightened out ahead, a long, gentle downhill stretch. Perfect. I could build up some real momentum here. Maybe I could coast all the way to the next town. As the thought crossed my mind, a set of lights flickered to life in the darkness ahead. Not headlights. These were different. A string of dim, yellow, pulsating lights. They were spaced out evenly across the entire width of the highway. A roadblock. It wasn't just them. It was never just them. They hadn't chased me because they didn't need to. They were already ahead of me. The Kenworth driver's betrayal wasn't just his inaction. It was the time it bought them. He slowed down, talked to me, and gave them the minute they needed to set up their next trap. He hadn't just been scared. He was part of it. He was the shepherd, guiding the lamb to the slaughter. My escape attempt hadn't been an escape at all. It was just me, rolling silently and willingly into the next, more terrifying phase of their cage. The roadblock wasn't made of flashing police cars or official-looking barriers. It was something far more unnerving. As I coasted closer, my momentum carrying me silently forward, I could see what the pulsating yellow lights were attached to. They were hanging from a heavy steel cable, stretched taut between 2 massive pine trees on either side of the highway. And below the cable, blocking the road completely, was a line of rusted, derelict farm equipment. An old combine harvester, a hay rake, a plow, dragged out from some forgotten field to form an impassable wall of jagged metal. It was a crude, brutal, and terrifyingly effective barricade. Behind the wall of junk, figures moved in the gloom. More of them. Not 2, but maybe 5 or 6, their forms dark and indistinct. They weren't wearing masks, not that I could see. They looked like locals. Farmers, maybe loggers, dressed in flannel and denim. They moved with a quiet purpose, their faces turned towards my approaching rig. This wasn't just a crew of hijackers. This was a community. The old trucker in the Kenworth wasn't just a part of it. He was one of them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The trap wasn't just on the road was the trap. This entire stretch of desolate country was their hunting ground. My silent, coasting escape had turned into a slow-motion collision course. I was a ship without a rudder or sails, drifting inexorably towards the rocks. I stomped on the brake pedal out of pure instinct. Nothing. Of course, nothing. The air pressure was gone. I had bled the system when I released the parking brake. There was no stopping. The men at the roadblock just watched me come. No one shouted. No one waved a weapon. Their stillness was absolute. It was the calm of people who knew the outcome was already decided. My truck, my cargo, my life, it was already theirs. They were just waiting for the formalities. The Matador, my beautiful rig, met the barricade with a sickening crunch of tearing metal and shattering glass. The impact wasn't fast, maybe 10 miles an hour, but the sheer mass of the truck turned the old farm plow into scrap. The front of my cab buckled, the windshield spiderwebbing into 1,000 fractured lines. My head snapped forward, connecting with the steering wheel with a dull, concussive thud. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of bright lights and deep, swimming darkness. When I came to, it was to the smell of gasoline and hot metal. A thin trickle of blood was running from my forehead into my eye, blurring my vision. My ears were ringing. The cab was tilted at a crazy angle, shoved sideways by the force of the impact. The engine was silent. The only sound was a faint, rhythmic ticking from somewhere deep in the wreckage. Through the fractured windshield, I saw them approaching. They walked slowly, their boots crunching on the debris. There was no menace in their stride, no aggression. It was more like ranchers approaching a steer they had just roped. One of them, a tall, gaunt man with a weathered face and a long gray beard, stepped up onto my running board and pulled open the groaning driver's side door. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the cargo. He just stared at the sealed container for a long moment, then nodded slowly to the others. "It's the real thing," he said, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. Just like he said. He? Who was he? The foreman from Ethelred? Someone else? The bearded man finally turned his gaze to me. His eyes were pale blue, devoid of any emotion. Not hatred, not anger, not even pity. It was the detached, professional look of a man doing a job he's done 100 times before. "You can get out now," he said, his voice calm. "Don't make this difficult." Difficult? I was trapped in a wrecked truck, surrounded by a small army of hostile locals in the middle of nowhere. My head was pounding, my rig was destroyed, and they were talking about my cargo like it was some kind of holy relic. This wasn't a sanctuary. This little patch of highway wasn't a town or a diner. It was their abattoir. It was the place they brought things to be butchered, and they had built it just for me. They knew I was coming. They knew I would try to run. The entire escape was a pre-written chapter in their playbook, and I had followed it word for word. I looked past the bearded man, at the faces of the others. They were all staring at the container with a kind of reverent awe. I followed their gaze. Stenciled on the side, in plain black letters, was the company name, Ethelred Solutions. And below it, a single line of text I hadn't noticed when they loaded it in the dark warehouse. A destination. It didn't say Denver. It said, Pendleton, Oregon, final delivery. Pendleton was 100 miles behind me. I was never supposed to leave Oregon. The entire route, the story about Denver, it was all a lie. A misdirection. I wasn't hauling this thing across the country. I was just delivering it to the next link in the chain. And this was the delivery point. The words stenciled on the container felt like a punch to the gut. Pendleton, Oregon, final delivery. My entire journey, every mile I'd driven, was based on a lie. The Denver destination was a fiction, a ghost story to keep me pointed east while they herded me into this deadfall. Ethelred Solutions hadn't hired me to transport cargo. They'd hired me to be the bait. They had served me up on a platter, and this strange, silent cult of the highway was here to collect. The exhaustion that had been creeping at the edges of my consciousness for hours suddenly washed over me in a tidal wave. It wasn't just physical fatigue from the road. It was a deep, soul-crushing weariness. The kind that comes when you realize you've been playing a game where you never even knew the rules. The bearded man, their leader, watched me process the information. There was no triumph in his eyes, just a flat, weary patience. "Get out of the truck," he repeated, his voice unchanged. It wasn't a threat. It was an instruction. My body screamed in protest as I moved. My head throbbed in time with the ticking sound from the wreckage. Every muscle ached. I swung my legs out of the cab, my boots hitting the pavement with a thud. I was unsteady, dizzy, but I managed to stand. The cool night air hit my face, smelling of pine needles and leaked diesel fuel. The half-dozen men surrounding me didn't move, didn't crowd me. They just watched, their faces impassive, their hands hanging loosely at their sides. There were no visible weapons, but there didn't need to be. The sheer weight of their numbers and the utter isolation of the place was more intimidating than any gun. My mind was a fog of pain and confusion. I was trying to think, to find an angle, a way out, but my thoughts were slow and sticky. The concussion, the stress, the sleepless hours, they were all taking their toll. I made a critical mistake then, born of pure desperation. I looked at the bearded man, my voice raspy. "The money," I croaked. "The payment for the haul. It's in my bag. Take it. Take the truck, the cargo, just let me walk away." It was the wrong thing to say. The man's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. A few of the other men exchanged glances. It was a look that said, "He still doesn't get it." The bearded man shook his head slowly, a gesture of something that might have been pity. "This was never about money, son," he said. "You're a part of the shipment. You're the key." The key? The words didn't make sense. I was just a driver, a hired mule. My mind latched onto the only part of his statement that registered. Not about money. The triple pay rate from Ethelred wasn't to ensure my compliance. It was to make the job so attractive that I wouldn't ask too many questions. It was a lure. My gaze fell back to the blinking red light on my dashboard, still faintly visible through the shattered windshield. It was still pulsing. Blink, blink, blink. Even with the main power out and the truck a wreck, it had its own power source. It was still active, still broadcasting. One of the younger men, impatient, took a step forward. "Let's just get it done, Elias." The bearded man, Elias, held up a hand, silencing him. He looked back at me, his pale eyes searching my face. "There's a protocol. The link has to be severed correctly. Otherwise, the contents are compromised." He gestured towards a container. "The box knows if the driver is in distress. It knows if the heart stops. You have to come with us." Willingly, the blood in my veins turned to ice. The box knows if the heart stops. The bug they planted, it wasn't just a tracker or a kill switch. It was a biomonitor. It was reading my vital signs, my pulse, my stress levels. The cargo, whatever it was somehow linked to me, to my life functions. I wasn't the driver. I was the damn life support system. The key wasn't a metaphor. My exhausted, battered mind finally broke. The sheer insanity of it. The masked men, the silent roadblock, the living cargo. It was too much. The instinct to survive, primal and thoughtless, took over. I shoved Elias hard. The move was pure desperation, clumsy and weak, but caught him off guard. He stumbled back a step. It was all the space I needed. I spun around and ran. I didn't run towards the woods. I didn't run back the way I came. In a moment of pure, adrenaline-fueled panic, I ran straight towards the darkest, most unknown territory, the forest on the other side of the road. I plunged off the pavement, my feet sinking into the soft pine needles on the forest floor. I could hear them shouting behind me now, the calm finally broken. "Don't lose him! Get him!" Branches whipped at my face, tearing at my clothes. The darkness under the trees was absolute. I ran blindly, stumbling over roots, crashing through undergrowth, fueled by nothing but terror. My lungs burned. My head felt like it was going to split open. I just had to get away. I had to put distance between me and them. After what felt like an eternity, I risked a glance back. There were no flashlights following me. No sound of pursuit. Just a silent, black forest. I stopped, leaning against a tree, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was hidden. I was free. And then I heard the dogs. A deep, baying howl that started with one, then was answered by another and another, until the whole forest was filled with the sound of the hunt. They hadn't chased me because they didn't need to. They just let me run into the woods and then unleash their hounds. My desperate flight hadn't been an escape. It was just me, tiring myself out before the real predators were set loose. The sound of the dogs turned the forest from a sanctuary into a cage. Every tree was a bar, every shadow a corner I was being backed into. The baying was a promise of violence, a sound that bypassed the thinking part of my brain and hit something ancient and primal. I was no longer a trucker. I was prey. The thought of their teeth tearing into me sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through my exhausted body, and I started running again, deeper into the suffocating blackness. I had no direction, no plan. I just ran away from the sound, my feet slipping on damp leaves and mossy rocks. My lungs were on fire. The throbbing in my head had become a blinding, white-hot agony with every jarring step. I fell, my knee cracking against a hidden root, and a scream of pain was torn from my throat. I lay there for a second, crumpled on the forest floor, the scent of damp earth filling my nostrils. The dogs sounded closer now, their howls more distinct, more individual. They were spreading out, working the woods like the professionals they were. Getting up was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My body was a symphony of pain, a coalition of failing parts protesting every command. But the sound of the hounds was a potent motivator. I pushed myself up, leaning heavily on a tree, and forced myself into a limping, staggering shamble. I couldn't run anymore, but I could still move. The forest floor started to slope downwards, steeply. I stumbled and slid more than I walked, grabbing onto saplings and rocks to keep from tumbling head over heels. The sound of running water reached my ears, faint at first, then growing louder. A creek. Water could hide my scent. It was a classic trick from old movies, a desperate gambit, but it was the only one I had. I half fell, half crawled the last few yards to the creek bed. It was maybe 10 feet wide, the water shallow but fast-moving, cutting a dark, gurgling path through the trees. It was achingly cold. The shock of it on my shredded legs and battered body almost made me pass out, but I bit my lip and pushed forward, wading into the center of the current. I started moving downstream, staying in the water, the icy flow numbing my legs, my boots filling with gravel and freezing water. Every step was a battle against the current and my own failing body. The baying of the dogs seemed to fade slightly, confused by the water. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe this could work. Maybe I could follow this creek to another road, a house, anything. I moved like that for what felt like hours, a ghost shuffling through a black, watery trench. My world shrank to the sound of the water, the feel of the slick rocks under my feet, and the constant grinding pain. Then the creek opened up. The trees receded, and I found myself standing in a wide, moonlit clearing. And in the center of the clearing, I saw it. The source of the ticking sound from the wreck. It was a generator, a small, portable one, chugging away quietly. Wires ran from it to a single, powerful work light mounted on a tripod, illuminating a scene straight out of a nightmare. My truck was there, or what was left of it. The cab was gone, completely sheared off the frame. The container sat alone on the stripped-down flatbed trailer. Elias and his men were working under the light, using heavy-duty cutting torches and pry bars on the container's sealed door. They hadn't towed my rig. They had dismantled it right there on the highway and dragged the pieces here to this hidden workshop in the heart of the forest. The black Lincoln was parked nearby, its doors open. This was their place, their center of operations. My desperate flight through the woods, my clever plan with the creek. It was all for nothing. I hadn't been escaping from them. I'd been running in a circle, right back into the heart of their world. I had followed the creek right to their doorstep. I froze at the edge of the tree line, a deer caught in the headlights. One of the men looked up from his work, his face lit by the harsh glare of the work light. He saw me. He didn't shout. He just slowly lowered his cutting torch and pointed. There he is. Elias turned, his gaunt face a mask of weary disappointment. The creek always brings them here, he said, to no one in particular. The dogs hadn't been for hunting me down. They were for hurting me. They were the sheepdogs, and I was the lost lamb, guided by instinct and fear right back into the pen. Two men detached from the group, and started walking towards me. Their movements slow and deliberate. There was nowhere left to run. My truck was gone. My strength was gone. My hope was a bitter ash in my mouth. I was cornered, exposed, and the true nature of their operation was laid bare before me. This was the end of the line. This was the bottom. This was it. The end of the road. I stood at the edge of the woods, my legs numb from the icy creek water, my body screaming in protest. The two men advanced on me, their shadows long and distorted in the harsh glare of the work light. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of panic, went strangely calm. It was the clarity that comes with absolute certainty, the quiet acceptance of the inevitable. I had nothing left. No fight, no flight. Just the cold, hard reality of this clearing. Elias watched me, his expression unreadable. The other men had stopped their work on the container, their cutting torches hissing into silence. The only sounds were the chugging of the generator and the gurgle of the creek behind me. I was the center of their universe again, the final piece of the puzzle that needed to be put in its place. My gaze drifted from the approaching men to the container. It sat on my desecrated flatbed like a dark altar. They had cut through most of the locking mechanisms, and the heavy steel door was slightly ajar. A deep, unnatural darkness seemed to emanate from the gap. There was a smell coming from it, too. Faint, but distinct over the scent of pine and diesel. It was the smell of ozone, of sterile metal, and something else, something vaguely organic and wrong, like antiseptic mixed with damp soil. As the two men got closer, my eyes were drawn back to my wrecked cab, or what was left of it, tossed aside like a piece of garbage near the tree line. The windshield was gone, the driver's side a mangled ruin, but through the empty frame, I could see the dashboard. And on the dashboard, that tiny red light was still blinking. Blink, blink, blink. That goddamn light. It had been the source of all my terror, the symbol of their control. It was the thing that told them my heart was still beating. And that's when I saw it. The flicker in the dark. It wasn't the light itself, but the wire. The fine, black wire leading from the blinking LED to the small matchbox-sized device stuck under the dash. In my panicked flight, when I'd shoved Elias and bolted from the cab, my flailing leg must have caught on it. The wire was pulled taut, partially dislodged from the device. As I watched, a tiny blue spark, almost invisible, jumped the gap between the loose wire and its connection point. The box knows if the driver is in distress. It knows if the heart stops. They thought the signal was my heartbeat. But what if it wasn't? What if the steady, rhythmic pulse wasn't a monitor at all? What if it was a pacifier? A digital lullaby? A signal that told the contents of the box that its driver, its key, was calm and stable. And my distress, my panicked run through the forest, my fall, the spike in my heart rate, hadn't registered because the signal was never measuring my heart in the first place. It was just a simple, steady, pre-programmed electronic pulse. And I had almost broken it. A new thought, sharp and electrifying, cut through the fog of my exhaustion. What if severing the link didn't compromise the contents? What if it woke them up? Elias's words echoed in my head. There's a protocol. The link has to be severed correctly. They didn't just want me. They needed me calm. They needed me willing. Not for my sake, but for theirs. Their whole elaborate, cautious, theatrical process. The ghost car, the disabled rig, hurting me with dogs instead of just shooting me. It wasn't about psychological torture. It was about risk management. They were terrified of what was in that box. They were walking on eggshells around it, and I, or rather the signal from that blinking light, was the only thing keeping the egg from hatching. The terror that had held me paralyzed for hours didn't vanish. It transformed. It sharpened into a single, needle-fine point of savage, desperate resolve. I finally understood the game. I looked at the two men, now only 10 feet away. I looked at Elias, standing by the container. I looked at the wrecked shell of my cab. They thought they had all the cards, but I was holding one they didn't know about. I was the key, all right, and I was about to turn the lock. My gaze met Elias's across the clearing. For the first time, I let him see the fear leave my eyes. I let him see the cold, hard glint of something new, something he hadn't planned for. His brow furrowed slightly. He saw the shift. He saw the prey decide it was done being prey. He opened his mouth to speak, maybe to give an order, to tell his men to grab me. But he was too late. I already knew what I had to do. The two men were almost on me. There was no time to think, only to act. My new, terrifying understanding had forged a plan in the fires of my desperation. It was a lunatic's gamble, a throw of the dice with my life, their lives, and God knows what else is the stakes. But it was my only move. I didn't try to fight them. I didn't try to run. I turned my back on them and sprinted, not towards the woods, but directly at the mangled wreck of my cab. It was the last thing they expected. They shouted in surprise, their footsteps pounding on the soft earth behind me. I had maybe a 10-yard lead. It had to be enough. I launched myself at the wreckage, ignoring the jagged edges of torn metal that ripped at my clothes and skin. I half climbed, half threw myself through the empty space where the driver's door used to be, landing in a heap across the ruined seats. My target was right there, blinking its hateful, steady rhythm. The little red light. My hand shot out, my fingers closing around the thin black wire. The two men were right behind me, reaching for me, their hands grabbing at my ankles, my jacket. One of them had a fistful of my collar, tried to haul me back out of the cab. I ignored them. I ignored the pain. I had one goal. With a final, desperate surge of strength, I yanked. The wire ripped free from the matchbox-sized device with a final, bright blue spark. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The world held its breath. The red light on the dash went out. The blinking stopped. The signal was severed. The digital lullaby was over. A sound came from the container. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the night with an intensity that vibrated in my bones. It was a low, resonant hum, like a massive power transformer coming online. The ground beneath us trembled, a deep, seismic thrum that grew in intensity with every passing second. The men who had been grabbing me let go, stumbling back with wide, terrified eyes. Across the clearing, Elias stared, his face a mask of pure, abject horror. "No," he whispered, his voice lost in the rising hum. "What have you done?" The work light they had set up flickered violently, then exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the clearing into near-total darkness, lit only by the cold, distant light of the moon. The generator sputtered, coughed, and died, as if some immense electromagnetic pulse had just washed over us. The hum from the container intensified, shifting in pitch, becoming a piercing, high-frequency scream that felt like it was going to tear my skull apart. The heavy steel door of the container, which they had been laboriously trying to pry open, was suddenly blown outward with terrifying force. It shot across the clearing like a cannonball, smashing into the parked Lincoln and crumpling it like a tin can. From the black maw of the open container, something began to emerge. It wasn't a creature, not in any biological sense. It was a shape, a complex, shifting geometric form made of something that wasn't quite solid and wasn't quite light. It unfolded itself, expanding out of the container, a chaotic lattice of impossible angles and shimmering, oily black surfaces that seemed to drink the moonlight. It was silent now, the high-pitched scream having stopped the moment the door blew open. Its silence was more terrifying than the noise. Elias and his men were frozen, paralyzed with a fear so profound it was religious. They were staring at the thing they had worshipped, the thing they had sacrificed for, and it was nothing like they had imagined. This was not a relic. This was not a treasure. This was a catastrophe. My gamble hadn't just revealed a weakness. It had unleashed the apocalypse in miniature. My plan was simple. If I couldn't escape the cage, I would break it open and release the tiger that was inside with us. I didn't know what would happen next, but the terrified faces of my captors told me one thing. The rules had changed, and in the chaos, in the sheer, mind-bending terror of this new reality, I might just find a way to crawl out of the wreckage. I pushed myself backward, out of the ruined cab, my eyes locked on the impossible shape that now dominated the clearing. My final gamble was on the table. Now, we were all going to see what the cards held. The geometric shape did not attack. It did not roar. It simply acted. The air in the clearing grew thin and sharp, crackling with a static charge that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The ground, which had been trembling, went still. A profound, absolute silence fell, a void where even the memory of sound seemed to be erased. The impossible shape, a twisting knot of black geometry, pulsed once, a silent beat of pure darkness. Elias and his men were caught in that pulse. They didn't scream. There wasn't time. As the wave of silence washed over them, they simply came apart, not in a shower of blood and gore, but like a poorly woven tapestry being unraveled thread by thread. They dissolved into motes of colorless dust, their forms losing coherence, their matter unmade and scattered into the silent air. One moment they were men, frozen in terror. The next, they were nothing, their flannel shirts and denim jeans collapsing into empty piles on the forest floor. They had finally opened their sacred box, and their reward was to be erased from existence. My own mind threatened to follow them into that void. The sight was so fundamentally wrong, so contrary to every law of physics and biology, that my brain simply refused to process it. But deep inside, the primal instinct that had kept me alive this long was screaming one word: move. The shape was now turning its attention to the clearing itself. The generator, the wrecked Lincoln, the dismantled pieces of my rig, they began to shimmer and distort, their edges blurring as if seen through intense heat. The thing was cleaning up. It was sanitizing the area, removing all evidence of the broken protocol, including its own container. This was my chance, the one window I would get. I scrambled away, crab-walking backward over the debris-strewn ground, my eyes locked on the unfolding nightmare. I couldn't look away. I had to know what it was doing. But I also knew that if I stayed, I would be sanitized right along with everything else. I got to my feet, my body a single, unified scream of pain, and stumbled back towards the creek, towards the dark tree line. And that's when I saw it, parked just inside the woods, 50 yards from the clearing, hidden under the deep shadows of the pines. The Kenworth, the old trucker's rig. He must have come back, parked it, and walked to the clearing to join the others. His final mistake. Hope, fierce and desperate, flared in my chest. I plunged into the woods, ignoring the branches that whipped my face, my eyes fixed on the Kenworth's familiar shape. The keys. Please, God, let the keys be in it. These people were arrogant. They were in their own kingdom. Who would they be hiding from? I reached the driver's side door, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I pulled on the handle. It was unlocked. I hauled myself up into the cab, a wave of vertigo washing over me. The air smelled of stale cigar, smoke, and cattle. And there, dangling from the ignition, was the key ring. My shaking hands closed around them. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned. The engine sputtered, caught, and then roared to life with a thunderous bellow that felt like the voice of God pushing back against the unholy silence of the clearing. I didn't waste a second. I slammed the truck into gear, flicked on the headlights, and stomped on the accelerator. The Kenworth lurched forward, crashing through the undergrowth, its big tires finding purchase in the soft earth. I burst out of the woods and onto the dirt track that led away from this cursed place, away from a thing that was patiently unmaking reality behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I drove like a madman, fleeing east, pushing the old truck harder than it was ever meant to be pushed. I didn't stop until the sun began to rise, painting the eastern sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. I found a two-lane highway, and then another, and then finally the blessed, familiar sight of an interstate. I was out. I was alive. I abandoned the Kenworth at a dusty truck stop in a forgotten corner of Utah. I took the cash I had, a few $100s, and I walked away. I bought a bus ticket and rode for 2 days, surrounded by the normal, oblivious faces of sleeping students and families, feeling like a ghost. That was 6 months ago. I'm not a trucker anymore. I can't be. The open road doesn't feel like freedom now. It feels like a thin crust over something deep and terrible. The empty spaces on the map, the long, dark stretches between the cities, they're not empty. I know what's out there. I know that companies like Ethelred Solutions aren't in the shipping business. They're in the containment business. And sometimes they fail. I work a cash job now, washing dishes in a greasy spoon 1,000 miles from Oregon. I can't sleep most nights. When I do, I see that impossible shape unfolding in the dark. I see men being unraveled like yarn. Sometimes I'll be standing here, up to my elbows in hot water and soap, and I'll feel a chill, a sudden drop in the air pressure, and I have to run outside, gasping for air, terrified that it's found me. I survived, but you can call it victory. I got away, but I left my sanity scattered on a forest floor in the Blue Mountains. I'm a ghost, haunted by the knowledge that the world we see is a comfortable lie. And I know, with a certainty that freezes the blood in my veins, that somewhere out there, right now, there's another trucker on a lonely road, hauling a secret load for a fantastic price, feeling lucky. He has no idea he's not a driver. He's just a key, turning slowly, silently, in a lock we were never meant to open.